2.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Academy, colleagues and friends. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. We are reaching you from the campus of Cedar Crest College in Allentown, Pennsylvania. A little bit of a distance between here and Canada, but it's so good to be here with you tonight. Dr. Rawson is with us. He's listening and watching this presentation. Unfortunately, we couldn't work things out so he could speak with you. But he's with us, listening to the presentation and having a sip of wine, as he promised us that he will be doing. I just want to take a moment and express my gratitude to the director of our Information Technology Department, Mr. Bruce Sarti, soon to be Dr. Sarti, for producing this event. So he's behind the scenes and making sure everything is moving smoothly. I had the pleasure of being with you during the past 2 years at the Academy's conference. And I recall the last time I was there, which was a year ago, less than a year ago. I mentioned that we should talk about anxiety, and what I had in mind was to give a series of lectures on anxiety disorders. This is not about anxiety disorders. This presentation is dedicated to all of you, my good friends, and it's about how to cope with uncertainty, the anxiety that comes with uncertainty, and ways of transforming that anxiety into a powerful source for creativity. The title sounds very philosophical, perhaps. There is a lot of philosophy in this talk, but this is also a very down-to-earth, practical talk. Again, as I said, this talk is dedicated to you. I had you in mind when I was putting it together, but you can apply some of the concepts that I'll be talking about to help your patients who are trying to manage their anxiety. Again, I'm not going to talk about anxiety disorders per se. I'm talking about anxiety as an aspect of being human. You'll be able to type in your questions, and I'll gladly go over them at the end of the talk. Unfortunately, you won't be able to speak to me through this mode of presentation. You'll have my email address at the end of the talk, and I'll be more than happy to send you a copy of my slides so you could access them. I place some meaningful text in the talk instead of just short bullets, so you can read this. So you'd be almost act as a transcript of a sort as you explore these concepts, hopefully a couple of times, and drawing some strength from them. So allow me to go to my first slide. Great. So this is the abstract for my talk, and I'm going to highlight just a couple of points for you. We'll define anxiety as the fear of the unknown, and from that perspective, it seems that anxiety is a uniquely human experience. Animals experience fear, we experience fear, but anxiety, as we understand it, is something that is uniquely human, and it has very much to do with the fact that we are self-conscious beings. And as self-conscious beings, we ask questions. What is the meaning of this? Why am I going through this? And also, the human psyche is oriented toward a possible future. There's a part of us that's always projecting itself into the next moment, next moments, and possibly to a distant future. So when people say, I want you to be in the here and now, in truth, that doesn't make sense. We understand that they're asking us to be attentive, don't go too far in the future. But there's a part of us that keeps projecting itself into the next sentence, next day, next month, next year. And when it goes way too far in the future, we can get trapped in that future, and you will see how that happens. Oftentimes we think of anxiety as a clinical set of symptoms which we should get rid of through the use of medications or certain techniques. I suggest that without anxiety it is impossible to create or to be created. So it's really about managing anxiety and gaining control over anxiety, using it properly as it becomes a source of fuel for incredible creativity. And creativity is always for others, it's not for us. We use creativity to touch other people, to improve humanity in a way. This talk is divided into 3 parts, and as I mentioned, they're very practical, down-to-earth suggestions and techniques that I'll be presenting to you. We'll begin with this poem by W.H. Auden. Very interesting poem. It says, "This world where gadgets are gods," and it seems to be the case, where we look at our cell phones, our computers, and sources of information to help us navigate life. And we go on talking many about much, but remain alone. Alive but alone, belonging where? Unattached as tumbleweed. And the name of the book, the title of the book where this poem appears, is called The Age of Anxiety. It was written in 1947. So I think of this as a prophetic vision of what is to come. And this is exactly what is happening. And as I'll get into it a little deeper, a little later in the talk, you will see that interpersonal anxiety is a major source of anxiety. We suffer a great deal because of personal anxiety. And in time you feel like we don't belong to anyone or to any place. We're detached, floating around, which increases our levels of anxiety. After World War II, the decades that came after World War II, in Europe they were referred to as the beginning of the Age of Anxiety. I submit to you that the Age of Anxiety really truly started with the year 2000. Shortly before the year 2000, we heard about Y2K. It was clearly a major source of concern for all of us here in the States. I'm sure it was also true about people in other parts of the world, Canada, I am certain. We knew something was going to happen and bad things were going to happen, and people put a lot of energy into solving their problem with that extra digit. But there was this image that, midnight 1999, moments before the next year, something was about to happen, and the next moment, we would have no water, banks would stop operating, etc., etc. Nothing of that sort happened. But we started a decade full of uncertainty and anxiety and wars and great source of distress, which brings us to 2020, where we are dealing with this horrific pandemic that is affecting the entire world. So anxiety is indeed part of our existence, but especially today, and talking about anxiety and ways of managing anxiety is very germane to this time. We begin with the word certainty, and as you recall from those talks that I gave those last 2 conferences, I'd like to give you the roots of these words both in Greek and Latin when possible, because they unpack what that word is really trying to say to us. Kirtanus, so when I'm certain, I think about factual things. I think about clarity. And when I talk about uncertainty, I'm talking about experiences that are becoming puzzling and unclear. So I submit to you that uncertainty, that sense of puzzlement, and the fact that things are not clear become a fuel source for anxiety. So if this talk were to stop here, I hope it won't, how can we reduce anxiety or stop anxiety, make things as clear as possible, define things as well as possible, use good communication skills, use the right words to make things as clear as possible so that anxiety levels will go down. Let's make a distinction between fear and anxiety. The key word for fear is the word known. Fear is apprehension about a known source of threat. So if I say I am afraid of, if I'm really talking about fear, I should be able to define the object. Spiders crawling up your leg, that would be the experience of fear, especially because spiders and I don't get along. I don't kill them, but we don't get along, so that will cause a great deal of fear. When you say spider, I know exactly what you're talking about. And once a source of fear has been identified, it gives us options. I can get up and run out of the room. I can try to get the spider off my leg. I have options available to me because the source of threat is known. Anxiety, on the other hand, is the fear of the unknown, and it's this unknown quality that makes me think about all sorts of possibilities. So I start with very benign images. Something is crawling up your leg. What could it be? An ant? Did I drop something? It looks like it's crawling up my leg. And eventually, these scenarios become more and more intense, overwhelming, and in time, quite catastrophic. It is this unknown quality, feature of anxiety, that forces my imagination to explore all sorts of possibilities. And please note, these usually start with very benign images and possibilities, and gradually, if the anxiety persists, these images become much more intense and quite destructive and debilitating. So anxiety is the apprehension about the unknown. I love this word, which we'll be using throughout this talk, ankhal, which means to make narrow. And this is where we need to understand that anxiety has different levels, and at different levels it can do different things for us. To make narrow means anxiety can give me a sense of focus. So Greek is such a beautiful language, and in Greek words are multi-dimensional, have so much depth to them. But if we use ankhal, so anxiety is about things getting narrower to the point that although initially by narrowing my focus, I can accomplish more, I can be more efficient at what I'm doing, but in time this could turn into that which can blind me or choke me, basically. It's going too narrow if it narrows too much. So I have so many things to do, my anxiety goes up, I'm going to focus on this task. And then at one point, if anxiety persists, all I see or all I can process is that there's a mistake on that piece of paper, and that's all I can think about. I've forgotten about you who are with me, who can support me and help me out through this crisis, but I no longer see you. I'm just focusing only on the trouble that is presenting itself in my experiences. That is pathological, damaging anxiety. where we feel completely disconnected. The only thing we see is anxiety and nothing else. In the past few years, I've developed an instrument that measures different dimensions of anxiety, and I'll be happy to send you a copy of this simple, very simple instrument, Dimensions of Anxiety Inventory, it's called. And it measures 6 dimensions of anxiety. This is extremely helpful to use to, first of all, get a sense of which one of these dimensions is most troublesome, causing distress, but also what to do about them and how these dimensions interact, which I'll share with you in just a few moments from now. So if I may ask you, while you're sipping your wine and sitting back, I highly recommend that you jot down a few things on a piece of paper. See which one of these dimensions is the dimension that is consuming you the most, or if not consuming you, preoccupying the most. The 6 dimensions of anxiety are the somatic dimension, the cognitive dimension, the emotional dimension, the interpersonal dimension, the behavioral dimension, and the neurological dimension. So what do they mean? When I'm anxious, my heart rate increases, my digestive system is suspended, I may experience physical pain, achiness, stiffness, etc. These are the somatic aspects of my anxiety. When I'm anxious, I may be perturbed by disturbing thoughts or potentially disturbing thoughts. After a while, I cannot focus, I can't concentrate. You're talking to me and I'm not paying attention to you. I pay attention for a couple of minutes and then the next moment I'm completely distracted. This is the cognitive dimension of anxiety. By the way, mistakenly, too much emphasis has been placed on this dimension, that anxiety is always cognitive, and I respectfully disagree. Years and years of research disagree. Anxiety can have many manifestations, manifestations that are often medicated or ignored, but they can continue to consume a person. When I'm anxious, I may experience different emotions. They can range from the experience of sadness to frustration to anger, but it's also possible that I can feel incredibly numb to the point that I feel nothing or I don't want to feel anything. That's the emotional dimension of anxiety. When I'm anxious, I may want to avoid social settings. I don't want to be around people. Being around people makes me anxious, and one reason for it is because I have to behave in a certain way. I have to respond to you in a certain way. I have to smile. I have to be supportive. This form of anxiety, the interpersonal anxiety, can devastate relationships, as I will show you in a few minutes from now. When I'm anxious, I may engage in behaviors that are maladaptive. And the word maladaptive, from the prefix mal, from Latin evil, behaviors that initially seem to be helpful, but in the long run they can do a lot of damage. So maladaptive, damaging behaviors. Again, these are behaviors that initially promise me some comfort and rest, some solace, but in the long run these are actually destructive behaviors. From over drinking or overeating or over shopping, engaging in behaviors that again initially make you feel good, but long term it can be quite devastating. Which brings me to the final dimension of anxiety. This is the neurological dimension of anxiety. You may not be familiar with this term. It is used extensively in Franklian psychology. Neurological anxiety is the anxiety which is centered on meaning. So in neurological anxiety, I keep asking, what is the meaning of this? As I will say shortly, I believe that this is the most destructive form of anxiety. You cannot medicate this kind of anxiety, nor can you meditate it away. This is it has to be faced and really asking, what's the meaning of this suffering? What does this mean? Suffering all about? If you were to create a graph of your dimensions of anxiety, as I take you through these one at a time, you could actually put it on a graph, and you can see for yourself which one is the greatest source of anxiety at this point in your life. And I highly recommend you do this. So as I take you through these dimensions, 0 to 5, 0, none, absent, absolutely not there, and 5 being extreme levels of anxiety, this can help you focus on what kind of anxiety do you have and what can I do about it. I have my students use this and they collect data on it. I've used it in at very large conferences when we were talking about anxiety disorders, which is what we will be talking about tonight. And it's interesting, sometimes age affects the changes in these graphs, and sometimes it's quite unpredictable. So don't think about populations or groups or peepholes. Think about you and which one of these is affecting you the most. So start with the somatic dimension of anxiety. Somatic dimensions, somatic bodily, anxiety manifests itself in terms of physical and physiological symptoms. This has to do, as you know, with the overactivity of the somatic nervous system, which will result in a great deal of physical tension, achiness in the body, physical tension. We see this commonly in people who suffer from generalized anxiety disorder, and we don't acknowledge that it's actually the anxiety that's contributing to physical pain. People go to chiropractors, they're put on muscle relaxants, etc., and none of them seem to work. It's because its origin is actually from the experience of anxiety. Because it is physical, we dismiss it. It can't be anxiety. It has nothing to do with it. It has indeed, through the somatic nervous system. Complaints could range from achiness to digestive problems to dermatologic problems, heart palpitations, etc. The key to reducing somatic anxiety is to reduce the activities of the somatic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. One way of releasing and reducing somatic anxiety when it has physical, musculoskeletal manifestation is through exercise. Actually, you kind of burn off some of that excess energy within the muscles. As far as reducing sympathetic activity, then you can use deep relaxation, meditative exercises, and to me, a person who has never really meditated, I would say music. Clearly, certain types of music could bring about a level of relaxation in this mode of anxiety, in this dimension of anxiety. If you simply medicate this form of anxiety, the symptoms are covered up, but they do come back again and again. So it really requires some active interventions. As you can see, with the balance between somatic, sympathetic, and parasympathetic nervous system branches of the autonomic nervous system, when we observe people with chronic anxiety, especially with physiological manifestations, we see that they're spending more time in the sympathetic leg of the autonomic nervous system than the parasympathetic, which, as you can see, will result in increasing cardiac output, all sorts of digestive problems because during an anxiety response, the digestive system is actually turned off. So from dry mouth to loss of peristalsis to all sorts of upper and lower GI problems. You also may see urinary complications. Extreme stress will inhibit release of urine, so inhibits urination, which sets the stage for some forms of UTI, etc. So you want to make a shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic. It's very important to discover what works for you, what allows you to make this shift. And if I may suggest, please keep this in mind. If you have a busy office, and I know many of you do, go to a quiet place, even for a few minutes. Quiet place where you can reduce environmental stimulation. Stimulation from the environment, light and noise. If you could reduce those, automatically you begin to make a shift to the parasympathetic state. The cognitive dimension of anxiety, as I mentioned, most people think this is what anxiety is and this is where your interventions should be. It's extremely important. We think about possibilities of what could happen, but it's a single dimension, a very important dimension, but it's a single dimension of anxiety. This is where my imagination and my thoughts take me into a possible future with all sorts of scenarios, and I refer to this as the bottomless pit of distorted thoughts, what ifs. You keep going down, down, down. And here's an example. I can be sitting in this room, this lovely quiet room with a very, very messy desk, or all kinds of papers on my desk. I could be sitting here and thinking about 6 months from now, when everyone that I know is infected with the COVID-19 virus, all my friends, my loved ones, they're all gone, and I'm sitting here experiencing tremendous anxiety and experiencing probably one of the most destructive things you can do to a human being. Please keep this in mind. The most destructive thing you can do to a human being is to make them feel helpless, because helplessness sets the stage for self-destruction. There's always something you can do about a situation, and that's we'll get to that a little later, by tapping into resources that you have on the inside. When in a concentration camp, Viktor Frankl, who survived 4 concentration camps, he was denuded of everything he had and he owned, but inside of him he could recite poetry, he could say prayers, in his head he could recite passages from the Psalms, etc. So his liberties were taken away, but the true freedom stayed inside of him. He could access those beautiful psalms and prayers and poetry. So the most effective way of reducing cognitive anxiety is to confront distorted thinking. Thinking that says, nobody loves me, nobody cares about me, everybody's going to die, nobody's going to come to my practice. Those generalizations and polarizations, everything is either good or bad. And the worst thing, and I'm sorry you doctors, I'm sure you're all guilty of this, is that you focus only on the negative and dismiss all the positive things that surround you or you hear on a daily basis. So it's called filtering. You filter out all the positive and you focus only on the negative, only when something went wrong or it wasn't quite perfect. That's a cognitive distortion, and it can fuel anxiety to a great extent. I'm sure you know by now that one major contributor to insomnia is cognitive anxiety. This future-orientedness, and thinking about possibilities and worrying about what ifs. So learning to reduce cognitive anxiety is extremely important. And number one thing, confront those distortions. Just to add to that, another way of confronting those distortions is to go get a therapist. I don't recommend right now, but you can do that if you like, or journal. Get a piece of paper and write down those thoughts that are eating at you and consuming you and giving you a great deal of causing a great deal of distress. Talking things out is the most effective one, as you will see also applies to this dimension of anxiety, which is the emotional dimension of anxiety. In the emotional dimension, we are stuck on certain feelings and emotions. The difference being feelings are much more subjective, emotions being that general umbrella. So we get stuck on certain feelings to the point that I'm constantly angry, everything is making me angry, or to the point where we want to detach from our emotions and become completely numb. Ask yourself, this day, throughout the day, was there a feeling that was persistent? I felt numb, I felt angry the whole day, I felt so frustrated, I was sad the entire day. It's important to process those feelings and emotions. And the best way to address emotional anxiety is to actually talk about it. There's no better substitute. You need to hear yourself say, I was sad, the whole thing, I couldn't think of anything else but sadness. And as your interlocutor, as the person who's engaged in this dialogue with you, I can ask, so what were the things that were making you sad? So as you explore those emotions and you unpack them, then we get to the roots of them. And sometimes that has to do with misperceptions. And as you will see in just a few seconds from now, but also being exposed to certain situations or people perhaps that contributed to those emotions. If you wake up in the middle of the night, or you're going to bed late at night and you have no one to talk to, then journaling is a very helpful thing. It's extremely helpful. About 20 minutes. Write down your thoughts, what's upsetting you, what are the emotions that are eating at you, etc. And in most cases, when I ask people to use this exercise, my colleagues, students, they say after 5 minutes it stopped. And I want you to limit yourself to 20 minutes. If it goes beyond 20 minutes, find an agent and start working on your next novel or something like that. It's not a good idea to go beyond 20 minutes unless you're working on a book. If you go beyond 20 minutes, which I've never seen or heard of, but it could happen, you become agitated, like keep writing and expressing yourself. So that's why talking about it is much more helpful. I'm going to now share with you the mystery of emotions from the pages of philosophy. And honestly, when it comes to understanding emotions, I don't think anything comes even close to this exploration. It comes from the writings of the 17th century great philosopher Baruch Spinoza, a Dutch philosopher. And he wrote about many aspects of life, and emotions was actually one of them. It's been said that when Einstein would get stuck in his writings, and he couldn't make progress, he would go and read just a few pages out of one of Spinoza's books, and that would inspire him to move on. So Spinoza can be a great teacher, mentor, and inspirer. What does he have to say about emotions? So please have a sip of wine and pay close attention. The human body, he says, looks for those things that will prolong its existence. He refers to those things that we're looking for to prolong our existence, desire. So we desire those things that increase our vital energies. If we interact with those things that increase our energies, we call that experience joy or pleasure. So we look for things that increase our energies. We call those things sources of pleasure. Those things that decrease our energies, he refers to as those things that drain us, basically, as sadness, give us the emotion of sadness. Pain, sadness and pain being the same thing, they drain us. When something or someone, perhaps in your practice today, made you experience joy, feeling good about yourself, just your energy levels went up, you feel affection toward that person, you experience love toward that person, they increase your energy. So we want to be around those people who increase our energy. We try to preserve and protect and interact with those things that increase our energies, bring us a sense of joy. When something or someone is depleting us, making us feel sad, we begin to experience resentment toward that person or that thing, because they're draining our energy. We try to either avoid them or destroy those things that reduce our energy. Ultimately, this is what Spinoza says, and he is so on target. Emotions are about replenishing or depleting our energies. So when we talk about sadness, you are interacting with things that are draining you. When you talk about joy and happiness, gladness, you're interacting with things that are increasing your energy. This beautiful conceptualization appears in Spinoza's Ethics and his other works, which you can purchase from lovely Amazon.com, the Canadian version, which I'm sure it's identical to the American version. And it's a book for life. You need to have this on your bookshelf, even if you don't read it. It's good to have it on your bookshelf. And you will say, well, that's the 17th century. It's very wonderful, but it's 17th century thinking. Think again. Neuroscientists are finding exactly what Spinoza is talking about, that the emotions are really about fluctuations in our, yes, he wasn't talking about neurons firing, parts of brain firing and parts being quiescent, but looking for Spinoza, written by respected neuroscientist, physician Antonio Damasio. Looking for Spinoza. Joy, sorrow, and the feeling brain. And that's exactly what the brain is, feeling brain. The interpersonal dimension of anxiety has to do with our relationships, our close relationships, intimate relationships, but most of us spend more time at work than at home. So interacting with all these people who enter into our daily lives, day after day, could contribute to interpersonal anxiety. The American psychiatrist Harry Stack Sullivan wrote extensively about this form of anxiety. In fact, I don't know of anyone that has come even close to Sullivan's conceptualization of interpersonal anxiety. He basically, so I want you to just remember this. When you have interpersonal anxiety, it means at some level your communication with that other person has failed. It's broken down. It's broken down. There's no way of getting rid of interpersonal anxiety unless you were to, leave that person, leave your job. You have to reestablish communication. So I'm not going to communicate with you properly or effectively, because ultimately in interpersonal anxiety, I think you're going to punish me. I think you're going to reject me or just disapprove of me. So there's going to be incredible pain. So I might as well play a different role or be quiet, which further damages the process of communicating with you. So the ending is not a good ending if this interpersonal anxiety keeps growing in intensity. I don't know where I stand in my relationship with you. And I think this virtual reality, this virtual mode of communication is incredible. I would not have been able to be with you, with some of my students who can attend class. Yesterday I was talking to friends both in Canada and France at the same time. This is incredible. But it can also limit some of the non-verbal modes of communication that help us get a sense of where do I stand in my relationship with you. If you don't mind, I'm just going to make this suggestion, and it's really comes from the bottom of my heart. Limit texting when you are experiencing interpersonal anxiety. It's going to be damaging. I can't hear you. Those emojis I can interpret in so many different ways. When you say certain words, I can misconstrue them. When I say, I guess it's over, that could mean so many different things. It would be very destructive. When you're experiencing interpersonal anxiety, put away your phone. Put away your phone. Put away Zoom, if possible, and try to have a face-to-face interaction with the other person. Is our relationship safe? Who am I in this relationship with you? What is my worth? Can I be replaced? Those are the things that will fuel this kind of anxiety. How could you get away from this kind of anxiety? It's human anxiety. It's interpersonal anxiety. You can't make it go away, but you can use it to communicate more creatively, more effectively. Or if you leave it alone and it builds up, it will destroy a form of communication. The best thing to do is to reestablish communication. If you have waited too long, damage has been done to communication, then the best thing to do is to find someone with whom you can openly speak. This is not someone who's going to judge you. This is not someone with whom you have to act in a certain way, wear a certain persona. You don't have to be a title, worry about saying the wrong thing. Almost like rehearsing what's going on, what you want to say. This person could help you out. Again, this needs to be someone who is impartial, non-judgmental, someone that you can truly be yourself with. Again, it seems like I'm talking about a therapist or a rabbi or a priest. I'm talking about a human being who can be a good listener to you and help you hear yourself. And then once you have practiced, you know what you're going to say, you have clarified certain things, then you reach out to the person with whom the relationship has been damaged or is not working properly. One of the finest books that explains what happens to us when we experience interpersonal anxiety was written by a British psychiatrist, R.D. Lang, a remarkable human being. This being his best book. He wrote many books and later they became unusual, but this basically says that many forms of psychoses have to do with the fact that we have developed a divided self. That in front of you I have to act a certain way because you like me when I speak in a certain way. You like me when I dress in a certain way. You like me when I act in a certain way. When in truth, I like to speak in a different way, and I like to dress in a different way. And sometimes I like to do things that I think are a lot of fun, but I can't do them in front of you. So there are two of me. In time, the tension between these two selves becomes so great that you experience not a split personality, but a break between these two parts. And the break between these two parts will result in psychosis, loss of touch with reality. Simply put, we live in a world that is ultimately about judgment, being judged, and conditional judgment. The behavioral dimension of anxiety has to do with changes in behavior when you're experiencing a great deal of anxiety. So under a great deal of anxiety, we may develop maladaptive behaviors. Again, these are behaviors that initially work. My God, my anxiety was just disappeared after I had that glass of wine, and that second glass of wine, and now I need vodka, I need something else a little stronger. So initially it seems like it takes away the anxiety, only for the anxiety to come back with a vengeance. And it can become self-destructive. This is another one of those dimensions of anxiety that is neglected often. And it's so important, and I'm going to make a suggestion here in just a moment, what you can do about this form of anxiety. Catch yourself when you notice that I'm doing things that I know they are not good for me. I'm dating the wrong person again and again. I'm interacting with this person that I know it's not good for me, but I go there to have fun and distract myself, but it seems like it's causing more and more problems. At one point, you lose the ability to observe these types of behaviors. So you need a good friend, someone from outside of you, to help you make the right decisions. This is so critical. This is so critical to reach out to a friend and say, hey, I'm doing this again. Am I making a mistake by engaging in this behavior again? I don't know. It seems like I'm falling to that same trap again. The reason we lose the ability to do that for ourselves is because under tremendous levels of anxiety, the judgment centers of the brain have become disabled in a sense due to excessive anxiety. Excessive anxiety will interfere with the functioning of the prefrontal and frontal cortex. The executive functions become drained and they can't function as well. So I make a bad decision and then I say to myself, what were you thinking? This part of my brain was not thinking. So I need you to become my prefrontal cortex. So before you date someone else, before you have that drink, before you sell your practice, talk to me, reach out to me. Let's have a conversation about it. By the way, I don't know anything about selling your practice, but I can talk to you about the other things. I'll gladly talk to you about it. This part of the brain. If you do not get enough REM sleep, if you do not get enough REM, rapid eye movement, this part of your brain is going to malfunction. That's one of the functions of REM, is to make sure this part gets enough rest so the next day you have your inhibitory functions back. So ask yourself when you say, I couldn't help myself. I couldn't resist it. I couldn't fight it. That's the failure of that executive function part of the brain. Manifestation of anxiety. You cannot just medicate this. Again, you have to understand this is also a way anxiety reveals itself. This brings me to the final dimension of anxiety called the neurological dimension of anxiety. And to me, this is the dimension that is ignored because it doesn't have clinical presentation. Dear friends of mine, just a few weeks ago, informed me that their son, a physician, a very successful physician, committed suicide. And they had no idea whatsoever that he was even thinking about suicide. But looking back, thinking about it, was that he kept saying, this is becoming meaningless. We're never going to win this war. This disease is going to affect people. So he's asking, what's the meaning of this? What's the meaning of this suffering? Neurological anxiety will result in our looking at life at times as pointless, trivial, and what I do is inconsequential. It doesn't matter. Who cares? What's the big deal? When you hear those things or you're saying those things, you have gone into this neurological dimension of anxiety. And with all respect to all of you, this is the dimension that is neglected by so many, and this is the dimension, to me, that will destroy humanity. We are meaning-seeking creatures. We want meaning. Why am I going through this? Why is this happening to me? So, with neurological anxiety, we become impulsive. We look for pleasure, intense pleasure. Maybe that gives me meaning. And next, we switch to things that give us extreme pain. In the end, what is it all about? And why should I be around here? Just to highlight a point, if we were not free beings, and I'm not talking about liberties. Liberties are outside of us. Lockdown is removing our liberties. And I'm sorry that people confuse liberties with freedom. Freedom is something that's inside of us. My freedom to continue to talk, your freedom to continue to listen to me. That's actually exercise that comes from inside. If you're in a chair and somebody has chained you there and said, you have to listen to this talk, you have removed your liberties. You're free to tune me out, to sing a song in your head. Make it a song by Leonard Cohen. Make it a good song and sing it in your head. You have that capability. That's exercising your freedom. But with freedom comes responsibility. I'm free to make choices, but what if I make the wrong choice? So, as long as we are free human beings, we are going to experience anxiety, because with freedom we make choices. With our choices, we have to face responsibility. So, you cannot make this freedom go away. You can numb yourself, but you can't make it go away. Some people may come into your life, these are dictators at different epochs in time in human history, who come and say, I'll take care of you, I'll take away all of your anxieties. I just ask for one thing, give me all of your freedom. So you have to choose to give them your freedom. And they take away the most sacred thing we own. This freedom for me to sing, pray, reach out into my imagination and think about beautiful things, think about loving things, etc. Just gradually taking that away from me by making me think that I don't have that freedom. So on a scale of 1 to 5, which one of those dimensions was the highest for you? Which one was the lowest? I would love to talk to you about this. Perhaps the next time we set this up, we'll set it up so we can have a conversation. So which one was high? What are you doing about it? Did you know that one of these was higher than the other one? This brings me to part 2. I promised that we're going to connect anxiety with creativity. Poiesis, Greek for to create, means to bring into being. How beautiful. So I'm creating something. So it's not I'm cutting and pasting, but I'm creating something. Like Dr. Viviana's office, that incredible design and those rooms, that's creativity. That's bring into being something that is not there yet. From formlessness to form. Creare in Latin. So we talk about creativity, we're talking about something that is somewhere in a formless state. It's there, but we want to bring it forth to this dimension. What am I talking about? I'm talking about, just to throw in something, I'm talking about these boundaries and creativity, which are connected to nightmares. But I'm not going to talk about nightmares today. So, ladies and gentlemen, you and I exist in two states at any moment. This moment, the next moment, previous moment, we exist in two states. A conscious state. If I ask you, where are you? What are you doing? That's the conscious state. But at the same moment, this exact moment, there's also you are existing in another state. We call it the unconscious, your inner world, if you will. It's very likely, and I will not be upset about it, that during this talk you went into a state of reverie, you went into a state of daydreaming, you went into this world, you tapped into this world. They exist side by side, simultaneously. Throughout the day, we spend more time here, and at night when we fall asleep, we spend more time here. And of course, when we wake up, we come into this world. So there is a barrier that keeps these two worlds apart. As you will see, this barrier is necessary. It's important for it to be there. But it's important for it to be there to a point. If it becomes too rigid, as you will see, all kinds of problems will emerge from it. So let's talk about what happens to this barrier when we talk about creativity, rigidity, and psychosis. So anxiety, actually one thing anxiety does, it makes this barrier, this wall in between these two worlds, porous. Anxiety will actually open this up. So as you can see, anxiety is necessary for some of the creative possibilities. Well, maybe if we did it this way, what if we rearranged it this way? Those don't come out of your conscious mind, they come from this world. So anxiety actually loosens up this barrier between these two. And we don't want the anxiety to take over. You'll see what will happen if anxiety takes over. And you want to allow some of these thoughts to get in. You're driving to work, you're driving home at night, and all of a sudden an idea shows up. Where did it come from? It came from here. You're allowing to relax this barrier a little bit, and ideas begin to get in, and then you say, oh, I should do something about it, let's sit down and do it. The barrier goes up. But anxiety is necessary, absolutely necessary to allow these two worlds to communicate with each other. How about anxiety and rigidity? Have you ever been around people who are so incredibly rigid and inflexible that, nope, this is the way things are, no, there is no other way, no, we are not going to do it any other way, etc. By the way, this is taught. You were taught to be this way. Somebody showed you this is the only way to do it. What is the shape of the barrier between these two? It's a brick wall. It is a brick wall, and it requires a ton of energy to keep this wall erected and up and functioning so that nothing can come out of this unconscious into this realm. And you can't even tap into this. And to keep this barrier up, it requires incredible amounts of energy. Highly rigid, inflexible people, they have one thing, they are consumed and tired, because so much of their energy actually goes into constructing and keeping this barrier up. Talk about psychosis. What is psychosis? When the barrier between these two realms has fragmented, it's gone, it's broken down, it's not working properly. Now this stuff, it just flows right into this world. Suddenly you see things that are not there, hear things that are not there, hallucinations. You're in a dream world while you're driving to work, which is, God forbid, it's very dangerous. Or you're talking to someone, and all of a sudden you hear a voice telling you to do something wrong or something rash, impulsive, etc. So it's this barrier that's the key. We want it to be flexible, we want to be able to put the barrier up, but we want it to have some holes. So the holes are here. Anxiety is going to say to you, what would be another way of promoting my practice? Another way of reaching out to people. To me was, what would be, I know I will not be with you, in the physical, well, how would I reach out to them? And I reached out to Dr. Ross and I said, I'd like to do a presentation for them, for the group that I met this past 2 years, and he was so kind. He said, oh sure, let's work it out. So, possibilities. I'm going to wrap things up by giving you some emergency ways of managing your anxiety. So this is the first aid mechanism for managing anxiety. Structure reduces anxiety. Anytime you create structure, you're lowering anxiety. So, I have 10 things to do. I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do about it. Structure reduces anxiety. And I kid you not, for the next hour, I'll work only on this project and only on this project alone. The anxiety will come down. I don't have an hour to put 15 minutes. For the next 15 minutes, I'll work only on this project and nothing else. I'll work only on this chapter of my dissertation, Bruce. Only on this chapter of the dissertation and nothing else. Only this aspect of my practice. Only this aspect of the of this conference you're putting together. So if you look at my desk right now, I'm glad you can't see it. There are all sorts of papers that I have to grade for the next few days. And later tonight, I'm going to focus only on one set of them. That's it, nothing else. No TV, a little Seinfeld a little later, maybe tonight at 11:30, but that's it. I'm going to put aside time to work on one thing at a time. Another way of coping with anxiety, anxiety is always about the future. Always about the future. The more you bring up yourself closer to this moment, remember I said there's no real this moment, but now, this hour, Wednesday night at 8:08, bring yourself closer to this hour, this moment. Anxiety will go down. Don't go too far into the future if your anxiety is very high. Great. So, and of course, doctors, I have to give you a medicinal approach. Yeah, I'm sure you appreciate that I give you some, more the medicinal form of intervention. And this is my suggestion to you. So if you're taking notes, this is it. Please note the correct volume. The correct volume is this. By the way, when I was in Canada, the normal in Canada was a little higher. You're very, very gracious people. When you're at restaurants, they poured a little more. When I was in Vienna, that was it. I don't know what that says about Viennese people, but maybe that's the correct way of doing it. So you ask for the second. Small amounts of red wine. It should be red. I'm sorry, white doesn't count. Has resveratrol in it. Has a relaxing effect in it, especially after dinner. It's a beautiful thing to have a sip of when you're with someone who cares about you and wants to listen to you. It's a wonderful, wonderful remedy. Again, don't make it maladaptive. Part 3 are just a couple of suggestions for life lessons. Back to the good old Baruch Spinoza, great philosopher, suffered a great deal, by the way, misunderstood and punished, but my God continues to contribute to humanity. Human power is very limited and infinitely surpassed by the power of external causes. Amen to that. That is so true. Nevertheless, we shall bear calmly. Be calm. We can't change what's around us, but we can do certain things. Those things that happen to us contrary to what the principle of our advantage demands. Those things that do not give us a sense of advantage. If we are conscious, please remember this. If we are conscious that we have done our duty, that what I was supposed to do, I have done. That's the only power I have over these situations. Hoping that putting together a talk for you has enriched you in some way. But that's the only thing I can do, is to hope that I've done my duty. I cannot make you think in a certain way, act in a certain way. Definitely I can make you drink less of that wine, and have some limitations as far as I'm concerned. Identity is a structure that contains anxiety. Your identity and my identity are mechanisms of anxiety curbing, anxiety managing intervention. So just want to emphasize, if your identity becomes too rigid, then it's easier to break it. But sense of identity, who am I? Not just what am I, but who am I? That identity, which should have some flexibility within it, will help us reduce anxiety. So ask yourself, when you say, who am I? What types of answers come up? I'd love to sit down with you and explore that answer. It's tragic how few people ever possess their souls. We're told to do certain things, do them in a certain way, but is it really me who's making those decisions before they die? Nothing is more rare in any person, says Emerson, than an act of his or her own. It is quite true. Most people are other people. Who am I? I am a copy of you. I'm emulating someone else, a successful person, and maybe not so successful person. Is it really me? Their thoughts are someone else's opinions, because we are so good at cutting and pasting. Their lives a mimicry, the passion a quotation. Please embrace who you are, and work with that person instead of that person being someone else or becoming someone else, just where you are, and assuming full responsibility for that self. That is one of the most healing things we can do for ourselves. In the past few months, in those dark months of dark hours of the month of March, when suddenly I had to leave this office and literally physically take all my files and books and all the academic stuff that I reach out for every day, and late at night record all my lectures, and you wouldn't believe how many lectures I had to record, finishing at 2 o'clock in the morning. This quote was in the back of my mind, and I want to share it with you, asking you to do this, to have these beautiful friends. I'm going to suggest some. Have these beautiful friends be with you when you're going through these difficult times. This quote comes from Machiavelli to a friend. He wrote this letter to a friend. Machiavelli was wrongly accused and punished tremendously, and for several years he had to live on a farm. So here's this statesperson, very intelligent. He works on a farm, and it says, I returned to my house, dirty. I entered my house and entered my study. At the door I take off the day's clothing, covered with mud and dust, and put on garments regal and courtly, and reclosed appropriately, I enter the ancient courts of ancient teachers, or received by them with affection. What is he talking about? He's living on a farm. Who are these ancient teachers? I feed on the food which only is mine, which I was born for, where I am not ashamed to speak with them and to ask them the reasons for their actions. And they in their kindness answer me. And for 4 hours of time I do not feel boredom. I forget my trouble. I do not dread poverty, and I am not frightened by death. Entirely, I give myself over to them. So if I could take this camera to my room at home, you would see, they're here as well. you will see who these people are. Lots of books that I only need to look at, one being Spinoza. I can look at and draw strength from them. These are books, great books, books that are full of inspirations, books perhaps that you read a while ago, but those authors are those great teachers that can inspire us, and I have a lot of those with me. I highly recommend. Place within your reach books that will inspire you, the Psalms, the Bible, Torah, whatever book, sacred texts. Definitely won't put a book by a politician over there. Well, maybe Churchill. Churchill's muse was Cicero. He drew from Cicero. Keep those books handy. Touch them, read a page or two, and I did. And truly, I drew strength from them. Night after night, even to this day, I can do the same. They're here with me, surrounding me. So, here's my email address. I hope this knowledge was helpful to you. I hope you'll put it to use. And I hope you reach out to me anytime you wish. Send me an email, please, and I'll gladly share those slides with you. And just to plant a seed here, Dr. Lawson, at one point I'd like to do a series on anxiety disorders, and I will absolutely connect them to sleep and sleep disorders. So I am done, and I'm glad to say that I finished before 8:30, so we have time if you have any questions.